So, hey, this theory here of mutual recognition and its revision of Freud's original theory is what I call a master theory. Because Jessica Benjamin, kind of in an amazing way, is trying to explain everything, trying to explain why you are who you are and why the world is what it is. And the amazing thing about that is Freud was also trying to do that in all his writing. And people were just like, that's the most amazing thing about Freud is he like tried to explain it all. Like, what a genius, right? And Jessica Benjamin's going like, yeah, I see that, but guess what? You're wrong. And I have a better theory of everything, which is just genius, So what's cool about master theories is that, they're probably not perfect, but they really give you a way to rethink the world. And so I'm going to cross all this stuff out here. And, let's first stick with the idea that much of the world, influenced by Freud, but even going back by political theorists like Thomas Hobbes and leaders and writers throughout history, most of the people, I think, sort of subscribe to this idea of identity through conflict with others, through separating yourself from others. I mean, we can see this kind of in the way Americans think of themselves, right? A classic American ideology is sort of individualism, rugged individualism, or radical individualism, right? In which, right, the individual is allowed to thrive and succeed because they, become better than other people or they separate themselves from others. And that idea of being an individual through your distinction, through your separation, is so strong in American society, right? But this is true, in a lot of different ways. And what this leads to, this sort of idea of identity as this separation, is what we call binary thinking, right? Let me get my pen there. So binary thinking. And binary just means sort of ones and zeros. It means two-way thinking, right? It's either this way or that way. So if we think of some of the ways we think of ourselves, and we're all different people, but think of ourselves against others, we might, maybe I am a man because I'm not a woman, right? I am, to think historically, I am civilized because I'm not savage or primitive. And by the way, the idea here isn't just that you separate the world into two things, but that they're dependent on each other. I only know that I am civilized, that I am, in this Eurocentric imperialist way of thinking. I only know I am, this great person and I live in this great society because I look at these savage, primitive societies around the world and I am better than them and I'm different from them, right? And so you use that separation, but it's the relationship that gives you your identity, right? I know I'm a man because I'm not a woman, but it's not just like, a physical thing. It's like, an insult, sexist men might say is like, don't be a woman, right? And it's because there's a whole bunch of characteristics of a man that you get by saying you're not a woman, right? So this is about when you're thinking about identity in this way and you have binary thinking, you are sort of, again, creating a self and an other that define themselves in relationship to others. And obviously, you can start thinking about all of the binaries in our society. Maybe in our families. Maybe in school. Now, Jessica Benjamin, I've already talked about, doesn't want us to see identity as inevitably about negation and conflict. And one of the big reasons she doesn't want us to see it that way is because what this does and what binary thinking does is it inevitably leads to a power struggle. And that these relationships that are set up, that the way we define ourselves, we define ourselves through domination. It's not just that we are not the other, but that we are better than the other. We are superior to the other, right? We need to keep the others down so we can remain up. And so it's a relationship of domination, but then the other side is that the other side is the result of submission, of giving in to this. Now, the way when I write binaries, and this is kind of like an academic way people do it, people do it different ways. But usually the dominant side of the binary is written with all capital letters, and then the submissive part of the binary is written in lowercase letters. And of course, kind of the ultimate, right, binary that sort of kind of all these things go under is sort of master slave. And obviously we know in our history there actually were masters and slaves, but this is almost like just everyone in these relationships have a master side and a slave side. Right? And so Jessica Benjamin wants to do two things. She wants to say it doesn't have to be this way. In fact, if we keep thinking of ourselves in these binaries, we're limiting ourselves. We're also going to make ourselves always unsatisfied because this is a struggle, right? This is a battle all the time, right? And so she's like, there's a better way to become who we want to become, right? And we've already talked about this, right? Her idea of mutual recognition. But before we talk about mutual recognition, she has an insight into power dynamics that's kind of one of her great insights, but is also kind of disturbing. She says that binary thinking, domination, conflict is so prevalent in our society, is so the dominant way of thinking about identity in our society, that it can't come from just a bunch of privileged, powerful people imposing this idea on others. That doesn't explain it all. Actually, in every situation, it not only requires someone dominating and being willing to dominate, but it also requires someone who's submitting and willing to submit. And this is the part that's difficult to grasp, and it's kind of uncomfortable because, let's just take the man-woman binary, right? Is that we don't want to think, right, that women have been oppressed by patriarchal, by male-dominated societies, somehow because they wanted to be, right? That's a disturbing thing. And in a lot of ways, it's wrong, right? I mean, we're celebrating the 100th year of suffrage, and that was a long battle. Women were always unsatisfied, in that situation. But Jessica Benjamin says that we have to recognize, right, that identity is a two-way street. That in some ways, the people on the submission side, right, are participating in this relationship, right? And that if we don't allow them to be participating in the relationship, we're actually taking away their humanity. And let me take that man-woman conversation as well. If all we think about in history is that men were oppressing women and keeping them down, right? And we don't think about women's role in that, women become victims. That's all they are. And what they don't have is any agency. And of course, women are full human beings. They're not just victims. They didn't just take it and they did a lot of things. Some sort of were part of the patriarchal system and some rebelled, right? But you can't just position the person in the submissive part of the binary as a complete victim of the situation. They have to have the capacity to have submitted to the domination, to also have the capacity to be resisting the domination, right? And so what Jessica Benjamin wants us to think about is that, and the takeaway of this is this thinking not only creates a whole bunch of dominating jerks, but it also creates a lot of us, right, who are unknowingly, right, and in some ways, like without really recognizing it, letting ourselves be dominated. And again, this is really difficult. This isn't like at all sort of meant to sort of explain any specific situation or any specific people, right? But just like, let's take the teacher-student binary for a second here, right? And it's weird that we're doing it now virtually, because I think in the classroom, I think you get the feel for this a little bit more. But when you walk into the room, right, and you sit down, and I get up and I start talking, right? Or you get into the Zoom meeting and you sit there and wait for me to start class. You are submitting to the teacher-student binary. I am in control. I am running this class. And yes, there are mechanisms out there that I keep my control. I'll grade you, and you have to make, you don't want to make me pissed off or anything like that, because I have some mechanisms of enforcement. But you also submit to it because it's all that you know. Like that, every year I go to school, right? And I'm the student, right? And that's what I'm supposed to be. How am I supposed to run this class? Like, you don't even think it's possible for you not to be the submissive part of this binary. And to be honest with you, I think a lot of teachers in the same way, right? They don't think it's possible to have a class in which they're not the dominating presence. But the other big kind of beautiful, hopeful part of Benjamin's theory, the one that I must confess I kind of live by, is she says it doesn't have to be this way. In fact, this is unnatural. If we can strive for mutual recognition, right, and dare to think outside our binaries, we'll be happier. The world will be more just. And the idea here is, let's take the teacher-student thing for again. What would a class based on mutual recognition look like? And remember mutual recognition. This is the theory that we can become more fully ourselves, not through separation, not through setting up these dominant situations, but through connection and radical equality. I am a full human being. I recognize this other also as a full human being, right? While they, that I recognize as a full human being, are recognizing me as a full human being. I'm a full human being. I recognize you as a full human being. You are recognizing me as a full human being. So I can, that flow, that mutual recognition flow. And before you say, oh yeah, let's all live happily together, let's all be equal. No, mutual recognition is hard, requires an amazing amount of rethinking, sacrifice, kind of risk, right? And I'm going to take the kind of most benign binary up here. I mean, we look at these binaries and they're the source of death and violence and inhibiting progress and justice, right, throughout our world, right? And this is a theory that wants to address those things. But let's just go back to teacher-student for a second here, just to keep it a little bit local and a little bit benign, right? What would it take for me to live, to think of myself in the classroom with you, right, through mutual recognition, rather through I am the teacher, you are the student? What would it take? Think about it, right? It would take a heck of a lot for me to do that. That would mean I say you have an equal stake and you have an equal right to be guiding this class. You have, as much right to be in charge of your education as I do. You have as much right to sort of decide on the subject matter, the direction, right? And so that would be me being in the traditionally dominant position. I'd have to sort of start rethinking what that is. But you in the submissive position, right, would start thinking about, well, I'd have a lot more responsibility, right? I'd have to stop thinking myself as someone who needs to like learn all this stuff before I can speak, learn all this stuff before I can do, and needs to start jumping in and being the full person that I am already, right? So, I mean, that's obviously the teacher-student dynamic. What I hope we can explore as we talk a little bit more about this is how mutual recognition can make us rethink all the power dynamics in our world. Now, how does this is English class. This is not psychology. This is not identity class, sociology class, American history class. Well, of course, right, when you study literature, you're always doing all of those things, right? Because literature is life, right, in all its complexity. And so the reason why we're starting with Jessica Benjamin is that, you know, it's a great way to understand life. So it's a great way to understand the lives we're seeing our literature represent. So what we're going to start asking you as we read through the stories and the poetry is, okay, let's think about power. Where is power in the text? And can you express it maybe in terms of binaries? Where is the conflict in the text? And why are people dissatisfied? Why do people seem unhealthy? Why are people struggling? Might it have to do, and again, starting with Freud all the way through Jessica Benjamin, you know, the insight of these master theories, it all has to do with identity. It's always about yourself, and it's always about yourself in relationship to others. It explains everything. So any conflict you're going to read in a text, any conflict you have in life, right, can be explained by this. So is the struggle, because of a particular power dynamic, right? And if people are achieving a type of happiness, is it a happiness through accepting domination or accepting submission? Or is it a deeper happiness through mutual recognition? Okay, and hopefully we'll play that out. Hopefully this makes a little bit of sense now, in combination with reading Dr. Kanan's brilliant summary. And also, I think maybe you can dive in, if you haven't already, Jessica Benjamin's opening chapter, where she kind of tries to summarize her theory, and the concluding chapter, where she tries to summarize it a little bit more. You're not going to understand all of it. You're not even going to understand 50% of it. But there's going to be lines that really jump out at you. It's like, okay, that makes sense. And so it's really a time where you really could use some great skimming, right? All right. See you in class, fellow learner.